Frankfurt, December 18th, 1945. The night was bitter cold, frost coating the barbed wire that surrounded the American supply depot like crystallized warnings. Corporal Thomas Brennan heard it faint, deliberate metal scraping against metal. He moved toward the sound with his flashlight off, boots crunching through frozen mud. Behind the mess hall, a figure crouched in shadows, hands clutching bread loaves, pockets bulging with canned goods. A boy, maybe 9 years old, eyes wide with terror and defiance. Before we continue, if you're enjoying these stories of forgotten courage and impossible choices, hit that like button and subscribe. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love hearing from our community around the world. These stories matter because they show us that even in humanity's darkest hours, individual choices could change everything. Brennan raised his rifle. The regulations were clear. Apprehend thieves. Turn them over to military police. File reports. This was theft of United States Army property. But the boy in front of him wasn't a criminal in any meaningful sense. He was a skeleton wearing clothes 3 sizes too large, holding bread like it was treasure. And in that moment, Corporal Brennan made a decision that would violate every regulation he'd been taught and save more than one life. Frankfurt in the winter of 1945 was devastation rendered in shades of gray. Allied bombing had destroyed nearly 70% of the city, reducing the ancient center to skeletal buildings standing like broken teeth against perpetually overcast skies. Over 5,000 residents had died in the bombing campaigns. Those who survived now faced something equally deadly: starvation. The production of food had been disrupted by the effects of war, including the destruction of farmland, livestock, and machinery. German civilians were subsisting on ration cards that promised 1,500 calories daily, but often delivered far less. The American occupation forces had established themselves in the city's least damaged sections. Military government offices operated from requisitioned buildings. Supply depots occupied former warehouses. The contrast between occupier and occupied was stark and visible. American soldiers had heat, electricity, regular meals, 3,000 calories a day. German civilians huddled in cellars, burning furniture for warmth, standing in bread lines that stretched for blocks. Children suffered most visibly. Orphaned by bombing or battle, separated from parents by the chaos of defeat, they moved through the ruined city like ghosts. Too thin, too quiet, eyes too old for their faces. Some begged near American checkpoints. Others scavenged in rubble. A few turned to theft. Military police reports documented increasing incidents of pilferage from supply depots, mostly food, anything portable and edible. The thieves were rarely caught. They knew the ruins intimately, could disappear into destroyed buildings where Americans feared to follow. Security increased. Fences went higher. Patrols became more frequent. Guards received clear orders. Theft from military supplies was to be treated seriously, pursued aggressively, punished appropriately. Corporal Thomas Brennan drew guard duty at Supply Depot 7 on that Tuesday in mid-December. He was 23 years old, from Boston, had arrived in Germany 6 weeks earlier as part of the occupation forces. He hadn't fought in the war. His number came up too late, after Germany surrendered. He was an occupation soldier tasked with maintaining order in a defeated nation. The duty was boring. Walk the perimeter, check the fence, ensure the padlocks held. 12-hour shifts in cold, that penetrated every layer of clothing. On the night of December 18th, halfway through his shift, Brennan heard something that wasn't wind. Stephen Keller, 9, had been stealing for 3 months. Before the war's end, he'd been an ordinary child school, gains, meals his mother scraped together as rations thinned. His father died in France, Normandy, the letter said, with no details and no body. After bombing destroyed the hospital where she worked in 1944, his mother took any job she could clearing rubble, sorting salvage, until her hands grew rough and her cough worsened. By October, she could no longer rise from their cold cellar bed. Pneumonia, the doctor said, though hunger and exhaustion had killed her. She died apologizing, begging Stephen to survive. Stephen kept that promise the only way he knew how. The first time he stole, it was bread from a baker who left loaves cooling near an open window. Stephen walked past, saw the opportunity, acted on instinct born of hunger that was physical pain. He ran with the bread clutched to his chest, expecting shouts, pursuit, punishment. Instead, silence. The bread fed him for 2 days. By December, Stephen had developed a system scout locations, identify vulnerabilities, strike when opportunity presented, disappear into ruins where pursuit was impossible. He shared what he stole. There were other children in the cellar where he sheltered 7 of them, ranging from 6 to 13, all orphaned or abandoned, all surviving on scavenging and theft and occasional charity from Germans who had barely enough for themselves. The American Supply Depot represented the greatest risk and greatest reward. The fences were tall, the patrols regular, the consequences of capture potentially severe. But inside that depot lived food in quantities Stephen could barely comprehend. Stephen had been watching the depot for 5 nights, learning patrol patterns, timing the gaps, identifying the weak point where fence met building and shadows pulled deep enough to hide movement. On the 18th, he made his move. He crossed the fence at 9:40 during the 15-minute gap between patrols. He had wire cutters stolen from a construction site, barely effective, but sufficient to create an opening large enough for a 9-year-old body. Inside the compound, he moved with practiced silence. The mess hall was his target. The back door was locked, but a window stood slightly open for ventilation, despite the cold. Stephen climbed through, dropped into the kitchen, froze, listening for footsteps. Nothing. Silence except for the hum of refrigerators and the tick of cooling ovens. He moved quickly. Bread first 4 loaves into a burlap sack he'd brought. Canned goods next, anything he could carry, grabbed without reading labels. Cheese wrapped in wax paper. A box of crackers. His sack grew heavy, too heavy. Stephen was reaching for a 5th loaf when light flooded the kitchen. He spun, saw the American soldier in the doorway, saw the rifle, saw his own death or imprisonment or whatever Americans did to German children who stole from them. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. Brennan had heard the window, had approached expecting a cat or wind. Instead, he found a boy skinny to the point of emaciation, wearing clothes that hung like curtains on his skeletal frame, holding bread like it was gold. The regulations were clear. Apprehend thieves. Turn them over to MP headquarters. File reports. Brennan knew those protocols, had been briefed on them during orientation. Brennan realized the thief before him wasn't a criminal, but a starving boy taking food that would likely be tossed by morning. He lowered his rifle. "Hey," he said softly. Stefan didn't understand the words, only the tone, gentle, puzzled. He thought of running through the open window, but fear pinned him. Brennan stepped closer. Stefan flinched. "Easy, not going to hurt you." Brennan set his rifle aside, breaking protocol, and approached slowly. Stefan clutched the sack. Brennan pointed to the bread and mimed eating, then gestured outward. Stefan, acting on instinct, raised 9 fingers, 9 mouths to feed. Understanding hit Brennan. The boy wasn't stealing for himself. He was keeping others alive. "Wait here," Brennan said, signaling him to stay. He left Stefan with the food and an escape route. 5 minutes later he returned with a box and filled it, deliberately bread. Canned meat, milk, sugar, chocolate, crackers, cheese, more food than the boy had seen in months. Stefan watched with terror and disbelief. Americans didn't give food to German thieves, they arrested them. This had to be a trick, but Brennan packed a box, closed the flaps, and pushed it toward him. "Here, for you and whoever needs it." Stefan stared, unable to process it. Brennan gestured. "Take it. Go, before someone sees." Stefan lifted the heavy box with shaking hands, managed to reach the window. Then Brennan called, "Wait," handing him the forgotten burlap sack. Stefan took it and ran into the dark. He reached the cellar at midnight, breathless from fear and the weight of the impossible gift. The children crowded around. Maria asked, "What did you get?" Stefan opened the box. Silence. Food they hadn't seen in months. Otto frowned. "Where did this come from?" "An American gave it to me." Otto scoffed, but Stefan handed out bread, meat, chocolate. They ate carefully, then eagerly, amazed it was real. That night they slept with full stomachs. Stefan lay awake, confused. Americans were supposed to be enemies, yet this one had helped him. Something in him shifted. 3 nights later, Stefan returned to the depot, telling himself it was reconnaissance, though he carried the sack. The fence was loosely repaired. He waited in the shadows. At 9:45, the American stepped out, left a box by the fence, and disappeared. Stefan waited, then collected it. Bread, cans, cheese, and a note. He couldn't read. This became routine. Every 3 nights a box appeared. Hunger eased. Maria's ribs faded. Otto's anger softened. In December, Stefan left a carved wooden horse, his most precious possession, in the empty box. Next time, extra chocolate and a note waited inside. One word he understood: friend. For 6 weeks, Brennan kept the arrangement hidden, falsifying reports and risking court-martial. He told himself he was preventing greater theft, but he knew it had become something more. But really, it was simpler than that. He couldn't stop thinking about the kids, eyes terrified but defiant, starving but sharing what he stole with others. Brennan had grown up in Boston during the Depression, had known hunger himself, had been helped by neighbors who shared when sharing meant going without. This felt like paying forward a debt he owed to strangers who'd kept his family fed when his father lost his job in 1933. The wooden horse sat on Brennan's footlocker. He didn't know what it meant, gratitude, trade, friendship, but he kept it, looked at it sometimes when he was writing letters home, let it remind him that the enemy was an abstraction, but children were real. In late January, Sergeant William Foster noticed the pattern. Foster was career Army, had fought in the Pacific, transferred to occupation duty after Japan surrendered. He was thorough, suspicious, not inclined to overlook irregularities. "Brennan, we need to talk." They met in Foster's office, a converted storage room that smelled of coffee and mildew. Foster closed the door. "The inventory reports from your shifts don't match other guards' numbers. Consistent shortages. Small amounts, but regular." Brennan had prepared for this. "Rats are bad in the mess hall, Sergeant. We're losing food to spoilage." Foster leaned back. "I've been doing this long enough to know when someone's lying, Corporal. What's really happening?" Brennan considered his options. Continued lying would fail eventually. Truth might result in court-martial. But Foster was direct, respected honesty even when it was inconvenient. "There's a German kid," Brennan said, "been stealing from the depot. I've been managing the situation by giving him food. Controlled amounts. Keeps him from breaking in." Foster's expression was unreadable. "You're feeding German civilians with military supplies. One kid and whoever he's feeding. Better than having them cut holes in fences and create actual security problems." Foster was quiet for a long time. Finally, "Show me." That night, Foster accompanied Brennan on guard duty. At 9:45, Brennan placed the box near the fence. Then he and Foster withdrew to watch. 10 minutes later, a figure approached, small, cautious, moving with practiced stealth. Stefan checked for observers, grabbed the box, began to retreat. Foster stepped out of the mess hall. The kid froze. Brennan moved quickly to Stefan's side, positioned himself between the boy and Foster. "Sergeant Foster, this is the kid I've been telling you about." Foster approached slowly, noting Stefan's emaciation, his oversized clothing, his defensive stance. He knelt down, making himself less threatening. He spoke in German he'd picked up some during the war. "Wie heißt du?" "Stefan," the boy responded quietly. Foster glanced at the box. "How many people are you feeding with this?" Stefan held up 9 fingers. "All children?" Stefan nodded. Foster stood, considered. Then he looked at Brennan. "This is still theft of military property. You understand that?" "Yes, Sergeant, but it's also a security solution." Foster pulled out a notebook, wrote something, tore out the page, handed it to Brennan. "This is authorization for regular distribution of surplus food to verified civilian dependents under supervised conditions. You're now running an official feeding program, Corporal." Brennan stared at the paper. "Sir, can't have you falsifying reports. That's court-martial. But authorized distribution under my authority, that's legal. Within my discretion as depot NCO." He turned to Stefan, switched back to German. "You come here every 3 nights. Corporal Brennan will have food for you. But no more stealing. We give, you take. That's the new rule." Stefan nodded slowly. Foster pulled out a chocolate bar, handed it to Stefan. "For you, not for sharing. Just for you." Stefan took it with trembling hands. "Danke." Foster waved him off. "Go on. Get out of here before you freeze." Stefan grabbed the box and disappeared. Foster and Brennan stood in the cold, watching him go. "This doesn't go in your service record," Foster said, "and it doesn't get discussed outside this depot, but it continues. Clear?" "Clear, Sergeant." "Thank you." What began as secret charity became unofficial policy. Foster authorized regular food distributions, created paperwork that looked legitimate, recruited other soldiers who could be trusted. The program expanded gradually. Stefan brought other children, the 7 from his cellar, and others he knew from the ruins. By February, they were feeding 37 children. By March 62, the food came from legitimate surplus mess hall overage, damaged packaging, items approaching expiration. Foster ran it like a military operation: distribution schedules, attendance records, even basic health checks. Brennan became the face of the program for the children. He learned basic German, learned their names, their stories. They called him der Brotsoldat, the bread soldier. In April, the military government launched a routine audit. Captain Robert Hayes arrived with a clipboard and suspicious attitude, determined to find waste or corruption. He'd never seen combat, had spent the war managing supply chains stateside. He noticed a pattern at Depot 7 within 2 hours. Unusual quantities marked as spoilage. Distribution records that didn't match standard formats. Authorization signatures from an NCO rather than an officer. Hayes called Foster in. Sergeant explained these irregularities. Foster had prepared for this. "Sir, we've been running a humanitarian feeding program for orphaned German children. Surplus food distribution under my authority. Under what regulation? Military Government Directive 23, which authorizes humanitarian aid to civilian populations. That directive requires officer approval. You're an NCO. The officer approval is retroactive, pending assignment of a civil affairs liaison. In the interim, I exercised emergency discretion to prevent civilian starvation." Hayes sat down his clipboard. "Sergeant, what you're describing is an unauthorized aid program using military resources." "Yes, sir. That's a serious violation." "Yes, sir." Hayes walked to the window, looked out at Frankfurt's ruins. After a long moment, he spoke without turning. "I have 2 options. Shut this down and file reports, or authorize it retroactively and convert your operation into an official program." Foster felt cautious hope. Hayes turned to face him. "I came here expecting to find corruption. Instead, I find soldiers feeding starving children." "That's not corruption, Sergeant. That's the only decent thing I've seen since I arrived in this country." He picked up his clipboard. "I'm authorizing this program effective immediately. You'll report to me monthly. All distributions will be properly documented. And we're expanding. Other depots should be doing the same thing." Foster allowed himself to breathe. "Thank you, sir." Hayes waved off the thanks. "Just keep feeding those kids." By May 1946, the program covered 4 depots and more than 300 children. What began with Brennan, feeding one starving boy, had become policy. In June, Brennan received orders to return home. He told Stefan during a distribution shift. The boy kept his face blank, but Brennan saw the flash of fear. "The program continues," he said. "Foster stays. Only I leave." But they both knew departures change everything. On June 20th, the children held a small farewell. They shook Brennan's hand, offered drawings and carvings. Stefan, last in line, gave him the restored wooden horse. "It was always yours," he said. "I'll keep it forever," Brennan told him. "You're going to be okay. Germany will rebuild." Brennan left Frankfurt on June 23rd, watching the city vanish behind the truck. Back in Boston, he built a life but kept writing to Stefan. Letters traveled through military channels. Stefan wrote back about rebuilding, school, and his dream of studying engineering. In 1952, he sent a photo 18, healthy, accepted to university. In 1965, now an engineer working across Europe, Stefan visited Boston. They met in a cafe, talking for hours. Before leaving, Stefan gave Brennan the wooden horse again, mounted with an engraved plaque thanking him for choosing kindness over punishment. "Why didn't you arrest me?" Stefan asked. Brennan said, "When I was 9 during the Depression, A neighbor fed us even when she had little. My mother told me we help because we're human. When I saw you, I saw a kid who needed help. Brennan died in 1998, the horse among his possessions. Stephen retired in 2000 and later wrote a memoir dedicating a chapter to the bread soldier. The wooden horse now sits in a Frankfurt museum, symbolizing one act of compassion that fed hundreds and shaped two lives.